Dear friends, today we have a new podcast with a quite interesting guest that we have Pepe Escobar. He is the friend of our International People's Unity Club. He is an international observer. I think it's like a man of the world. It's a global analyst that not just have, not only does he have a competency to give evaluation, but he talks to people who are right there at the certain moment, at a certain time. Pepper, we really appreciate that you gave us an agreement to participate in this podcast. Thank you and welcome.
Andrei, thank you so much. For me, it's an enormous pleasure and an honor. I met you guys a few months ago in Moscow, and in my next visits to Moscow, I hope to keep talking to you in Russia. I go to Russia many times a year, and next time is going to be in only a few weeks from now. So for the moment, thank you for having me.
Pepper, allow me to ask your first question concerning Latin America. You know, everybody's talking about it. It's, you came out of that region. It's, the historical aspects. You know how Latin America was fighting the colonial regime, the expansion, all those national heroes, they were fighting for freedom. And that's what we call Bolivarian army. Trump not looking at the international law, and he says that directly, as we said in the Soviet time that Western countries are taking off the mask. He says that I need resources and I need a lot of resources. And at the same moment, he wants to catch a few countries at a moment. That's the discussion right now. He wants to capture or take over. The political class of the United States, it's more or less they laughing at Venezuela's position right now to bring in a center of New York Maduro, who was captured without any court, without anything else. It's what we call the Middle Ages, Viking time. And we see that Venezuelans having a hard time going through it. How do you evaluate it? Would be another Bolivar that is gonna come up in Colombia and in Venezuela, all those countries that Trump is taking over. What do you think?
Thank you, Andrei. Maybe a first information for you and for our audience. Yes, I was born in Brazil. And when I was 9 years old, Brazil was the target of a regime change orchestrated by the US in the military coup in 1964. So my generation and generations that came later, we know everything about military dictatorships, regime change, and how the US used to brandish its foreign policy in Latin America from the 50s, but especially from the 60s and especially 60s, 70s, and 80s. We had all thought that this was a thing of the past. So now we are back to where we were 50, 60 years ago, and in an even more blatant way, where we have the President of the United States kidnapping the head of a sovereign nation in the middle of the night in his bedroom and taking him to the US on absolutely absurd charges, which any decent court of law in the US would dismiss right away. So this is where we are now. It is, as you mentioned, the law of the jungle. I would say even before the Vikings. We are way back in history now. And this is, of course, there are many reasons for that. The first one is what is now enshrined in the national security strategy of the United States, where it's quite blatant. Latin America, what the Americans call the Western Hemisphere, is ours and nobody else's. And nobody can interfere in our backyard. Try to submit this proposition to somebody in Rio or in Bogota or in Caracas or in Buenos Aires, obviously. public opinion all across Latin America, the Latin American street, is viscerally against it. The problem is fifth columnist bought and paid for Latin American elites, including in the case of Venezuela, the people that the CIA managed to buy to facilitate this raid against Maduro. So this is a constant all across Latin America, which is absolutely terrible. The domination of the empire in Latin America would not be possible with the local comprador, fifth columnist elites. But have they accomplished anything in Venezuela so far? No, because the idea was not only to kidnap President Maduro, was regime change. Did they get regime change? No. Will they get regime change? Only if they invade Venezuela. They cannot get regime change when they have 28 million Venezuelans against the Americans, especially now. So it's an impasse. So was this the real reason for this coup against Venezuela? A coup against international law, against democracy, against the laws that govern the inter-nations relations since the end of the Second World War. We all know about that. But the key motive is the petrodollar. This was something coming from an empire in desperation and, as you mentioned, in search of natural resources that they don't have anymore. They need a sort of Lebensraum, to quote Germany in the Second World War, in terms of uh, regions in the world that can provide natural resources and sources of energy for an empire which is deeply indebted, most of all. So Venezuela, of course, the largest oil reserves in the world. Greenland, for many reasons, including their own national resources and the fact that this is part of the war against the Arctic. There are many reasons. Iran, even more, there's a list of reasons to regime change in Iran that have been stressing for over 40 years. Is this a sign of power? No, it's a sign of fragility. And in terms of the American ruling elites, panic. Because if they don't annex other parts of the global south for themselves, and especially if they don't control the transit and the sale of oil in petrodollars, the destiny of the empire for oblivion in terms of great power will be much faster than any of us imagine.
You have noticed very good about petrodollar, so allow me to give you a couple of numbers. Correct me if I'm wrong. Today, at present time, America spends crazy money that they print. You see that their debt grows trillions per year or faster. The biggest macroeconomical sign, I was working at the Ministry of Economical Development of Russia. I know the numbers. We were talking about the external trade, how balanced it is, how much you sell, what industry or product groups you have, and always with a great surprise or astonishment, I was looking at it's minus $1.4 trillion per year. So American nation printing money crazy that fills out to the external world and takes out natural resources for this money. But BRICS, SHOS, and others we speak it out loud about, we're not hiding anything. We cannot always purchase American papers, assets, right? The paperwork assets. And because of the growth of it is crazy. And lately, They trade in yuan, in rubles, in UP, in dirhams. And first time in a history in Saudi Arabia when was putting the petrodollar, the strength to petrodollars, they started trading in Chinese currency. Do you think that Trump sees the crazy expenses for army, for the war budget, that he has to tie the American dollar to a petrodollar, or trying to control transit territories and pull it away from Chinese currency or any other currency? Maybe Venezuelan oil or control over Persian Gulf. We see the situation around Iran that has a certain change. So together it's a struggle of Russia, United States, and China. Who will survive this war?
Andrei, let's say that in these first months of the new Trump administration, not necessarily Trump himself, because he's not a strategist. You have a president of the United States who cannot read an intelligence report. And according to people who know him personally, some of our sources in Washington and New York, he doesn't read anything, literally. How can he make informed decisions when you don't understand key concepts, background of very complicated dossiers, and make an informed analysis on different variables, especially in very, very complicated issues? He cannot do that. He does that by instinct. He does that in a very transactional way, as we can call it in English, but basically a hunch or based on something that he heard in the past 5 minutes or so from one of his advisors in a very close circle. But the decision that seems to have been made by his administration after 1 year in power, either they would bet completely on all-out war and mostly against the global south, or they would bet on some sort of reform of the international financial system, which would imply a much more diplomatic approach. They chose the first approach, which is a hybrid and in some cases hot war against several nodes of the global south, including taking over territories, which would be the case of Greenland, kidnapping presidents and taking over their energy resources, the case of Venezuela. And in the case of Iran is all that and much more. Because Iran is a key node of the BRICS, as you mentioned. And we can say that the four top BRICS are, no doubt about that, Russia, China, India, and Iran. It would be an excellent opportunity for the Trump administration to blow BRICS from the inside, attacking directly one of their members. And of course, connectivity corridors. For instance, Russia is directly involved with Iran and India in the international north-south transportation corridor, which unites three BRICS nations. And it's an alternative to the Suez Canal and to connectivity corridors controlled by the US and the West. So this would be an extra blow against alternative corridors. And of course, the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Roads, the Chinese New Silk Roads, because Iran is a key node of the Chinese New Silk Roads in West Asia. So the case of Venezuela and Iran has many similarities, but energy is key in both cases. And we come back to the petrodollar issue. The United States could never allow Venezuela sitting in what they call their backyard, selling their oil in yuan. Absolutely out of it, and not in petrodollars. And of course, the Chinese were already buying Venezuelan energy in petro yuan, let's call it. And they cannot allow Iran, which is something that Iran has been doing for the past few years as well, to sell their energy, oil, and gas in Petro Yuan or in other currencies apart from the US dollar, away from the Petro-Dollar. So this is where Venezuela and Iran intersect. It's the same energy dossier concerning both of them. They didn't get what they wanted in Venezuela because even, and this was completely crazy, we have a meeting in the White House with the heads of all the energy majors in the US, and they tell Trump in his face, we cannot invest in Venezuela. It's out of it's uninvestable. We have to create new conditions. I wrote a column about that explaining why. There are two main reasons. One, sanctions devastated the Venezuelan oil industry. So you have to rebuild all that. And what was rebuilt towards a Chinese ecosystem with Chinese technicians, because this was the oil that was being exported to China. So the Americans will have to start from scratch. It will take years. It will take hundreds of billions of dollars. And obviously, a CEO of a big company look at that and said, no way. And who's going to guarantee to me that Venezuela is going to be stable? We can have, if Trump decides to replace Delcy Rodriguez and install a puppet government in Venezuela, there's going to be a major guerrilla battle all across Venezuela against the Americans. In Iran, the same thing. They tried the regime change operation until, I would say, 24 hours ago. It was a major disaster, even with a massive campaign all across the West, propping up these fake protests, not the original protests. There were original protests in Iran, cost of living, inflation, etc. Okay, these are real problems. But of course, they used, as they always do when they try a regime change operation, they use real protests, turn it upside down, get their infiltrated cells, and they turn it into a regime change operation, which is exactly what they tried in Iran, and it failed. So all these reasons, including the major petrodollar reason, they stay in the chessboard. This means they're going to try again. Because as we mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, this is an empire that needs extra natural resources to as collateral to their 38 trillion and upwards debt.
Money Уже 39 скоро будет.
Soon gonna be, yes, it's soon gonna be 39 trillion.
Soon 30, exactly.
Да.
So
Да.
everything that we're watching is going to
Огромной скоростью.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, he says it grows with a high speed. Pepe, you've been traveling a lot, and you've been to China. You're gonna visit China soon again. And as a person of the world, you can take a look, compare the cities, and maybe see the future. There's cleanliness, safety, that somebody can come and rob you. It's probably a very small chance. And they take off like a Rolex off of your hand. That's a technology, you know, it's we've met with you at Ostankino at the TV shows, and we've compared the railroads in China and United States, the kilometers that they use. Whatever in America they rebuild, zero. They still have a wooden railroad. They still remember the cowboys and Indians. The question I have for you, Latin America for the last 20 years have grown a trade with China 26 times. Not 26%, it's 26 times. China invested into the technologies, came in and helped to mine certain resources. Then they purchased them. That was quite a fair deal. They're not trying to buy regime. They're not trying to do non-commercial, non-profit organizations that would form the leaders or get into the government. No, honestly, they help you to make money. For example, the biggest trading partner, number one, is Argentina, or Brazil, or Peru. That's all China. Mexico, we don't take into account. It's a platform to put together Chinese products or materials, and then it goes on to America to walk away from tax fees. They have a big, it's a zero tax fee there from Mexico to US. So what do Chinese say? because, and that's what Trump says and speaks out loud. He says, I am not going to let Chinese companies to enter into Latin America. What do you think Chinese would do? They have invested a bunch of money. They bought Venezuelan oil. They're trying to take what they already bought. The vessels try to get in. And what we see right now, we just see you hear diplomatic statements. Is there any strategy that Chinese have?
Andrei, the reaction from the Chinese so far has been a mix of disbelief and dismissing as one of countless Trump's outbursts that he even forgets about it 10 minutes later. Because it's completely unrealistic. It's the same thing. If he had said anything about Chinese in Africa, it would be similar. And China has invested in 35, almost 40 different African nations. And the way, and Russia in terms of political capital as well. So Russia and China are the new soft power, and in some cases, hard powers in Africa. And in the case of China, China is the new soft power and the new economic power all across Latin America. For instance, Brazil, which is the most important Latin American country in terms of GDP, in terms of reach in the South Pacific, in terms of being an international player, a member of BRICS, of course. China has been the number one commercial partner of Brazil for over 10 years. If I'm not mistaken, at least around 15 years. The relationship starting at the top, when Lula was president in his first two terms, with Hu Jintao, and then now in this third term, the Lula with Xi Jinping, is very, very close. And the relationship between business circles in Brazil and business circles in China is immensely close. For instance, China can go to Brazil, they buy a plant by Ford that was not being used, they turn it around, they turn it into a BYD plant, and it's going to be one of the biggest car plants on the planet. In a state in North Brazil that was not traditionally a state where foreign firms were investing until a few years ago. You cannot change that with proclamations by President of the United States. This is not going to change. And in the case of, even in the case of Argentina, which is now, for all practical purposes, an American colony under this latest government, this can change with the next Argentinian government. And the contracts that China had with Argentina, these are contracts, signed contracts, which Argentina simply cannot tear it down because the Americans are telling them to do so. Forget it. They will go, everything will go to a court of law somewhere, anywhere. Buenos Aires, New York, London, whatever. So to try to expel China with these, I would say, warlike proclamations. No wonder the Chinese reaction so far is really saying that? Does he really mean it? Does he understand what he's saying? Obviously, he doesn't understand what he's saying because this is sold to American public opinion. He's posing as this macho man who is defending American interests in his own reasoning. Not at all. This is not going to change. For instance, China will be probably responsible, Chinese companies, to build this is something that is being discussed in South America, I would say, for at least 30 to 40 years. The famous bi-oceanic railroad from the Atlantic coast of Brazil to the Pacific coast in Peru, finally uniting South America. Who can pull that off in record time and with the engineering know-how? Chinese companies, of course. And they have already started. They already did the first studies, etc. So what does the US has to offer to Latin America and specifically South America to counteract the Chinese trade, investment, and sustainable development offensive? Absolutely nothing.
Thank you, Pepe. As I was listening to you, it is true that China carries a technology, money, possibilities, chances, infrastructure projects in a framework of not just Latin America, it's Eurasia, Africa, and we kind of stand to each other face to face. And often we hear terminologies like a trap by Fujita or by American politician Graham Allison. He entered that phrase, that he brought that phrase in. If there would be a change in a civilization where one leader would be changing for another, China would become another dominated center, then could be a military conflict of United States and China. We see the preparation for that. We see that China invests a lot of money into their army. We see that China lays down a platform with the Navy, military Navy. For example, they're starting building 3 air vessels, air carrying vessels. Of course, it's nice to see the parade that they have in Trump, and I watched that too, the parades that they showed in China. It's a powerful system and new military strengths. How do you see in China how China sees to weaken America? Do they look at that option to take America out, or what do you think they look at?
No, the Chinese don't see this extremely complex geopolitical interaction, and of course the fact that the economies are linked by trade, commerce, investments, etc. The fact that China is still part of the international financial system. You have, for instance, Chinese banks worried about secondary sanctions against them. It's a it's a very Chinese strategy, very, very long term. There is this element which is, I would say, it's classical Sun Tzu of watching your adversary commit mistakes and not interfering with these mistakes. The Chinese are masters at that. They see different American administrations making one big geopolitical or geoeconomic mistake after another. But, they just observe. At the same time, they have now a component that they didn't have, I would say, until a year ago. They are self-confident enough that when they are under pressure by the US, like the first Trump tsunami of sanctions last April, May, I was in Shanghai at the time, and the Chinese were unanimous, from the think tanks to the men in the street. They don't have the right to do this against us. We will resist. This is not the old China where we took everything passively. So now, not only their response, diplomatic and commercial, is very, very strong, and they are self-confident enough to know that from now on, they won't revert to a path of accommodation with the US. And they understand the American system very, very well. You have some of the best analysts in China. Many of them spend quite some time in the US. They know the system from the inside. They know the psychology of the industrial military complex, of how Congress works, how the presidency sometimes doesn't work at all in the US. They know all that. Just like some of the best Russian analysts, absolutely the same thing. The strategy that Russia and China use to deal with US is quite different. And this is something that, as an external observer myself, I wish there was more interaction at the highest level between Russian experts on China and Chinese experts on Russia. I don't think that's enough. We need more. We need more interaction from both sides, and especially to understand that the Russia-China strategy vis-à-vis the US is complementary. It's part of the Russia-China strategic partnership that President Putin and President Xi Jinping are talking all the time. This understanding at the highest intellectual and analytical level is essential, because this current war, which will have many other repercussions, is essentially against China and Russia, and also against BRICS and the global south as a whole. It's the empire trying by any means that they think that they have in their hands, annexation, harassment, threats of war, threats of bombing, provocations towards regime change, etc., which are going to be replicated everywhere, is against the global south as a whole. And the leaders of the global south, let's go straight to the point. It's Russia. They're Russia and China. That's it. You cannot escape it. And they should be leading the global south into organizing an organic response to an empire that is now completely out of control.
Pepe, you have noticed so well everything is against the leaders of the chosen BRICS and China, Russia. They have military strength and basics and logistics. It's so important. Americans are always working together with Europeans against us. It's a world majority and Western countries, as we speak in Russia, in Russian language. But this year, Europeans, I think they felt it as a little bit what means to be like a harvest, right? Like Trump harvested them. And I remember what the Denmark is writing, the expert is saying. They say, Mr. Trump, you want protection from Russia installing rockets and complexes? We don't have any restrictions to the military partnership. NASA and everything else that Americans did in Arctic shelf, Americans were trying to put nuclear weapons there and still stay there. You want to get the resources? The experts say, no problem, invest. We're not against. No, you want Greenland as a 51st state. And maybe you can correct me, Pepper, here. Trump is hurrying. United States will have soon 250 years of America. They want to build in Washington the biggest than in Paris, triumphal arch. And they need some kind of event. Maybe they want to show off. Is it a show or what? How do you evaluate with your experience at what takes place with Greenland? What Europeans say about Greenland there? France sent their soldiers there. They start officially disembarking the territory. I don't believe that there would be a conflict inside NATO and European countries will be fighting with US, but it's a serious disagreement.
Andrei, what's going on in the Greenland dossier in Europe is like we are watching a comic show. The last I checked, I think a few hours ago, I checked how many NATO and European experts have been dispatched to help Greenland. Apparently, not even 30 at the moment. So it's a gigantic army. A gigantic army of less than 30 people who are going to defend Greenland against the Americans. And obviously, we all know that the Americans can buy Greenland for a fortune. There's a figure circulating already that Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, is going to offer $700 billion that the Americans don't have, by the way, to buy Greenland. It's possible, but they can buy it with even less because the European Union itself is so scared that they are practically telling Trump, look, you can come here and have it, but please don't kill anybody. It's completely absurd. Can you imagine that last week they were still trying to convince Trump to have European peacemakers, meaning troops, in Ukraine in case ceasefire is organized between Russia and Ukraine. So these multinational forces, peacekeeping forces, should be European. They were begging Trump for that. And at the same time, they were completely freaking out with the prospect of the United States gobbling up Greenland with no resistance. So they sent the Prime Minister of Denmark and a Greenland minister to talk to Trump. And at the end, you look at their body language, we can tell that it was absolutely horrible. This means that the fate of Greenland, sorry, is already sealed. We still need to know the modalities of how America is going to incorporate Greenland. And there's absolutely nothing that the European Union, the European Commission, the European Parliament, individual nation states in Europe can do about it, except scream. So it is a pathetic exercise, in fact. And they're still thinking about, of course, okay, let's slap more sanctions against Russia, let's slap more sanctions against Iran, when they have a problem of the dismemberment of the European Union inside their own territory.